This weekend we saw Jaron Boots Ennis become a two-division unified champion after a one-sided slugfest versus Zayas. With the win, Ennis launches himself to the top of the 154-pound division, and he now has many options for his next fight. Now the question needs to be asked: can anyone beat Boots? Before we begin, I have now put Boots on my pound-for-pound list at number 9, as he is now a two-division champion with wins over two reigning champions in Stanionis and Zayas. If he's able to unify or become undisputed within the next few fights, he will definitely move into the higher tiers of the list. So I've made a tier list of 20 fighters in and around the super welterweight division, and I've ranked them on how much of a chance I give them in a potential matchup against Ennis. Some of these fights are very unlikely to happen in the near future, but if Boots quickly becomes undisputed, then you never know. First we have the fight everyone seems to be asking for next, Vergil Ortiz, who I have put in the close fight and 50-50 tier. The reason why this fight is so called for now is because they're both young, unbeaten fighters who have campaigned in the same divisions for years, and yet no fight has ever materialised. In terms of how the fight could go, what makes it interesting is the fact that both guys have had success versus similar styles. Boots notoriously has a stylistic advantage over pressure fighters, as he's a boxer-puncher. However, Ortiz has shown in his last few fights that he can perform incredibly well against other boxer-punchers like Madrimov or Erickson Lubin. A part of that is the game plan from Robert Garcia. All of his fighters are excellent at neutralising back foot counterpunches through patient, controlled aggression and counterpunching the opponent themselves. Despite this, I would slightly favour Ennis because Ortiz does get hit with straight punches coming forward, and I can't trust that someone with a stylistic disadvantage would win versus an opponent in Ennis, who's on a similar level. Although Boots' defensive flaws does make this fight interesting if it turns into a close quarters fight, which it probably will. Next is former unified and current WBC super welterweight champion Sebastian Fundora. I've put him into the decent chance tier and not the close fight tier because I believe the speed difference will be the decider in a Boots Ennis fight. Despite the insane physical dimensions of Fundora and the fact that he can now use his height and reach effectively, his hands and feet are still too slow and his upper body movement too stiff to avoid the speed and power that will come from Boots. Now the main success Fundora would have is obviously hitting Boots as he makes his way inside, as we know Boots often has leaky defense coming forward. However, we've seen how good Boots' chin is and how easy Fundora can be to hit, despite the improvements in range control. In my opinion, the fight would probably be competitive for 3 to 4 rounds, before the damage Boots would be able to inflict with that in and out movement to Fundora's body would then take its toll and leave Fundora open to big haymakers, where he'd then get KO'd. Probably the most underrated matchup for Boots is a potential Josh Kelly fight, who I've put into the close fight tier. Since moving up in weight, Kelly hasn't looked anywhere near as impressive as Boots. His notable victories coming in lackluster points decisions against Troy Williamson, Ishmael Davis, and most recently Bakram Murtazaliev. If you're wondering why I've put Kelly so high on the list, it's because his style is an absolute nightmare for anyone who isn't a top-level pressure fighter. He's improved massively since the Avanesian fight, and he's developed decent power at 154 too. A Boots fight is interesting because he does struggle with low-volume movers, as he likes to load up on power shots and rush his work, which leaves him often out of position. Kelly's speed and his reflexes would also pose a challenge for Boots, because in every fight Boots has the better reflexes and the higher speed, but against Kelly the speed is more similar, so Boots would have to think a lot more tactically in order to close the distance on Kelly, so he wouldn't be able to just rely on his athleticism. If Boots doesn't take Kelly as seriously as possible, he could get drawn into chasing him around the ring like Murtazaliev did, which plays directly into Kelly's hands. What does give Boots a slight edge, however, is the height and reach advantages and the power, which should allow him to win a decision. Next is former champion Tim Tszyu, who is unfortunately going into the no chance tier. This does pain me a bit because I'm a Tim Tszyu fan, but a Boots fight is technically all wrong for Tszyu. He's a pressure fighter with slow feet, who relies mostly on hand defences while moving forward to catch and counter. This plays directly into Boots' strengths, as Tszyu would eat so many jabs and feints, and he'd probably get knocked out inside 3 rounds by some massive overhand. On to the man fighting Tim Tszyu soon, Errol Spence Jr., who's also going into the no chance tier. This is for similar reasons as to why I put Tszyu there. He's a pressure fighter with slow hands and feet. Not to mention Spence is a smaller fighter moving up in weight, and he's been insanely inactive, and he's clearly way past his prime. Additionally, Spence was easily beaten by Crawford using counter-punching tactics, and he's always struggled with boxer punches, even in his prime, like when he fought Kell Brook. At this stage, Spence's technical flaws, like how he always steps with the jab and he leans over when he throws the body jab, would be easily countered by someone as sharp as Ennis. Back to the close fight tier is Bakram Murtazaliev. Now what makes this fight intriguing is the awkward punch angles, timing and power of Murtazaliev and how Boots would react to it. As we know, Boots' defense occasionally has some big holes in it when he over relies on his athleticism, which is made even worse when you match him against fighters who throw unusual punch sequences and from awkward angles. As it turns out, Murtazaliev does both at a high level. If Boots is to win this fight, he needs to stay super disciplined in the exchange, and when he returns to long range, he needs to keep his hands up so he doesn't get caught pulling out by a Murtazaliev long range hook. One of the more obscure 154-pound contenders is Brandon Adams, who I've put into the decent chance tier. Adams is a very big and aggressive boxer puncher with high ring IQ and good power. What prevents Adams from going into the close fight tier is his aggressiveness and his high work rate. In a potential Boots Ennis fight, he would likely be the aggressor, and while his guard is very tight, when he opens up there's plenty of openings for Boots at mid-range. To answer this, Adams did get knocked out by Charlo several years ago, who I believe isn't as powerful or fast as Ennis. The main chance Adams may have is using his size up close and he forces Boots to fight in a disadvantageous position, like when he's squared up at mid-range and he's easier to hit. Other than that though, Boots has the advantage in all the other areas. Now in the low chance tier is Boachuk. The reason he's here and not in the no chance tier is because there is a small possibility that if he's able to turn back the clock and come back with a performance like in the Ortiz fight, it could pose some issues. If Boachuk's chin doesn't crack from Boots' firepower, then it's possible that the sheer volume of punches could catch Ennis while he's throwing or with his hands down and hurt him. However, this is super unlikely, as Boachuk's chin has degraded in recent years, and his style plays completely into Boots' hands. A year ago, an Ennis vs Norman fight was the best to make at 147. Now a year later, nobody is interested anymore, since Norman got dropped and outboxed comprehensively by Devin Haney. I do believe this fight would always have ended in a Boots victory, because Ennis does everything better than Norman, and he's also more athletic. There isn't a single range where Norman would have an outright advantage. His only real chance would be if he's able to time Boots coming forward or if he's in an exchange and he lands clean shots. But more realistically, I see Ennis bringing Norman to him and outboxing him before stopping him. Moving on to the first fighter in the will win tier, and probably the most controversial ranking on the list, my number 5 pound for pound and 3-weight world champion Devin Haney. To some it may seem inconceivable that Haney could beat someone like Boots, but Haney would actually have several advantages if they were to fight. Haney would enter with a hand speed and a foot speed advantage, as well as a defense and technique advantage. These things would definitely cause issues, as Haney isn't a puncher, but the speed and elusiveness heavily discourages fighters from letting their hands go or trying to put heavy pressure on him. Haney's pure boxer style, combined with the fast hands, fast feet, and a complete unwillingness to engage with anyone he deems a threat, means that Ennis would have a very tough time catching Haney. Ennis is good at clinch work and good at breaking clinches, but the way Haney completely shuts down the opponent's arms by positioning himself underneath while initiating a clinch makes it hard to see Ennis on any offense on the inside. Ennis's main chance is probably to try and draw Haney to him, where he could then take advantage of Haney's bow and arrow type jab that he throws when he comes forward, but Haney is unlikely to accept any attempt to bring him forward, and this I see Haney winning a points decision. Next in the close fight tier is Israil Madrimov. At his best, Madrimov is a very tricky boxer puncher, with constant movement, feints, and unorthodox punch sequences, all things that Boots has had issues with in the past. Additionally, he's also incredibly athletic and explosive just like Boots, so Boots may not have an athleticism advantage. What gives Ennis a slight edge for me is that he's taller and longer, and so he should be able to force Madrimov to open up and take chances, which will provide openings. This is still risky though, as Madrimov's feints on the front foot could easily disguise dangerous shots that even the likes of Crawford struggle to see coming. We now have Ryan Garcia in the low chance tier. Realistically, Garcia's only chance is to time and land a good left hook when Boots is throwing, which is definitely doable but doesn't take him any higher than the low chance tier. Boots is bigger, more versatile, more adaptable, has a higher ring IQ, and every punch by the left hook is more polished. Ryan's only advantage is speed, but speed without the IQ or defense to go with it isn't enough to beat Boots. Teofimo Lopez is also going into the low chance tier. There's nothing that he particularly does better than Boots, and he's too small to really hurt him, especially as we've seen that Lopez's power is not carried up through the weight classes. Lopez does have a small chance if he's able to put on a similar performance to that of the Barboza fight, but even then I think defensively he's not good enough to win a boxing match against a taller, rangier fighter with similar speed and much more power. Rolly Romero is going into the no chance tier. This should be self-explanatory because he's probably one of the weakest champions in the sport. It's an absolute miracle he's even a champion at all, let alone a two-division champion. If Boots doesn't KO Rolly in one round, he's absolutely washed. Back up into the decent chance tier is number 3 pound for pound, Shakur Stevenson. The reason why he's here and not in the same tier as Haney is that for me, Haney's complete unwillingness to engage against anyone he thinks is a threat is the main reason he's almost impossible to beat. Shakur, on the other hand, while being technically better than Boots, does tend to engage in mid to close range, even against dangerous punches. The only time he didn't was against De Los Santos, though he broke his hand in that fight and he lost a couple of rounds due to the inactivity. The way I see Shakur's approach a Boots fight is quite cautious and disciplined, but Boots is taller and longer, and Shakur does get hit with straight right hands. I see Shakur winning rounds off the jab, but the strength and explosiveness of Boots is likely to hurt Shakur at some point and cause him to be too negative, where he isn't as good as a Devin Haney at that kind of game plan, and he'll probably lose a clear decision. Conor Benn just doesn't have a chance, does he? I mean, the difference in level is astounding here. A washed pro grey landed clean over and over again. Prime Boots would just eat Ben and his eggs for breakfast. Back up in the close fight tier is WBC middleweight champion Carlos Adames. This fight is likely to be very competitive, because Adames used to be a super welterweight but now campaigns at middleweight, so he doesn't have an insane size advantage like some other middleweights. Also, stylistically, this fight is great. Adames is a versatile boxer puncher. He can box and counterpunch when he needs to, but he can also put very high level pressure on his opponents when he needs to. The feints and movement from Adames is elite. His pressure is probably only second to Virgil Ortiz on this list, but he has the size and strength to back it up in a Boots fight too. Where Boots can win is the many openings. Adames will let his hands go, and he isn't too hard to hit at long range or on the inside, so there are many areas where Boots' speed and explosiveness could take over. The next boxer in the will-win tier is Janibek Alimkhanuly. Now, assuming that he's the same fighter off the peds as he was on them, Janibek should beat Boots if he decides to move up to middleweight in the near future. He does have a size and power advantage, as well as being incredibly quick and athletic compared to other middleweights. Janibek is also very capable at every range, able to outbox you behind the Kazakh amateur style or up close in a brawl. Ennis's speed advantage is the main thing he has in this matchup, but I can only really see this fight going one way, and that is Janibek keeping Boots at range and catching him when he makes a defensive mistake. The second to last entry on the list is two-weight world champion and WBA middleweight champion Erislandy Lara. A prime Lara will probably have gone in the will-win tier, because he was a pinpoint counterpuncher with great defensive footwork and upper body movement. Nowadays, however, Lara is slow due to age, preferring to hold his ground and pick opponents apart behind a solid jab and powerful left hand. What gives Boots a good chance here is that Lara isn't too big and he isn't as defensively effective as he used to be, so there'll be plenty of opportunities for a faster, younger boxer to hit Lara. That being said, he's still incredibly dangerous as his power has improved with age, and his counters are still incredibly sharp. The last boxer on the list is middleweight contender Aaron McKenna, who is going in the will-win tier. Boots and McKenna actually have a common opponent in the Luis Lima. Boots destroyed him in one round, whereas McKenna went to a decision. However, this has very little indication on how a fight between Boots and McKenna would go, as neither guy fights anything like the other. What gives McKenna the advantage is how dynamic he is, combined with the speed and his size. He's at his best when he fights off the back foot, and he seamlessly switches stance and makes his attacks incredibly difficult to read. His hand speed is also nearly as quick as Boots, which when you look at a potential fight between them, it's difficult to imagine Boots having much success, against a taller mover who's more dynamic and fluid than even Boots himself. That does it for the list. Let me know which you agreed with and which you disagreed with, who you would move, who you'd put on the list. Okay, like and subscribe.